All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've all had a really good day, the first day of SCCS-Bengaluru 2021. We now begin our evening plenary talk with Dr. Paula Kahumbu, who is the CEO of Wildlife Direct. Dr. Kahumbu will be talking to us about wildlife filmmaking as a conservation tool. But before we begin her talk, I'd like to invite Prasenjit Yadav to introduce Dr. Kahumbu. Prasenjit?
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Back in 2017, I was at the National Geographic headquarters where I heard this inspiring talk about application of storytelling in science and conservation, and it completely blew my mind. I kept thinking, how can we bring this person to come and speak at SCCS Bangalore? So I'm glad that it's happening today, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paula Kahumbu. She's an ecologist, conservationist, documentary producer, presenter, and a storyteller. So if I went through her entire bio, we just might not have enough time for her to speak. So I had to cherry pick a few of her accomplishments. Dr. Paula finished a PhD focusing on elephants from Princeton University in 2002. She's currently the Chief Executive Officer of NGO Wildlife Direct, an organization that helps conservationists directly report and publish their findings online. She's a Rolex National Geographic Explorer of the Year 2021. She won the Whitley Gold Award, the National Geographic Buffett Award for Conservation Leadership in Africa. And she is a producer and host of Africa's first and only wildlife documentary series made by Africans for Africans called as the Wildlife Warriors. She also spearheaded the hard-hitting Hands Off Our Elephants campaign, and their Tweet for Elephants online discussion reached close to 39 million people worldwide. She has received international recognition for the critical role in creating awareness and mobilizing legal reforms to halt elephant poaching in Kenya. For her work, she is recognized as the Kenyan Conservation Ambassador by Brand Kenya, and in 2015, she was granted the title of Order of the Grand Warrior by the Kenyan president for her outstanding service. During her work, she noticed that wildlife documentaries filmed in Africa, made exclusively by international crews, shaped the world's perception of Africa. Through Wildlife Direct, she is exploring how Africa can reshape that perception through the power of storytelling to celebrate Africa's traditions and relationship with wildlife. How are they reshaping the story of Africa? They are doing it by changing the storyteller. So in today's plenary, Paula will talk about filmmaking as a conservation tool, what she has learned, and what needs to happen to engage audiences and inspire them to take action. Over to you, Paula.
Thank you so much, Prasenjit, and thank you to everyone at the conservation organization for this amazing opportunity to talk to students from your network. I want to start by sharing some of my slides, and later on I'll show you a little bit of a clip of the TV series that you've just heard about. I run a conservation organization called Wildlife Warriors. Oh, what's happened? Hold on. I run a conservation organization called Wildlife Direct, and my organization is a Kenyan-based charity that seeks to change hearts and minds and laws so that we can save our wildlife. Our mission is to connect people to nature and wildlife so that they will treasure it and act to save it. It might sound like something very obvious. Africa is so well known for its amazing wildlife, these iconic species. We're so blessed that we have elephants, mountain gorillas, lions and giraffes and all these amazing species. But actually many of these species are in deep trouble. Their numbers are declining very rapidly, and now most of our species are entering into the red list. Elephants are now on the endangered species list. Giraffes, cheetahs, lions, rhinos, even hippos are sliding towards extinction. And this is happening, I believe, because there hasn't been enough done to win Africans into a conservation, kind of a conservation culture, or to be conservation literate or environmentally literate. If you think about the rest of the world, especially the global north, most people know Africa through wildlife documentaries. And if you think about the environmental movement in the global north, much of it is driven by documentaries that have been made in the global south. Could be about tigers from Asia, elephants and lions and rhinos from Africa, and of course, jaguars and other animals from South America. And those films have inspired people in the global north to action, inspired them to fight against climate change, against species extinctions. The films which have made in Africa, which number in the hundreds every year, are basically made for Western audiences. And as a result, it is supporting that environmental movement in the global north. But those films are rarely seen in Africa. And I mean extremely rarely. There are none of those shows on domestic free-to-air television television programs in Africa. And so this is a big challenge and perhaps a phenomenal opportunity for us to change this landscape, to actually bring those films back to Africa and actually make our own films in order to catalyze our own environmental movement. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a maybe a backstory. Sorry, that's not meant to be there. Oh, I'm so sorry. I put the wrong slides up. Sorry, 1 second.
Paula, we couldn't actually see any of your slides, so go ahead and share your screen.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. This is so strange. I can't see the Zoom. Okay, here it is. Okay, I'm so sorry about that. Let me just get the share screen.
Yep, we can see it now.
So why do I think this is so important? I'm going to be talking to you about how we have taken on this role of being Africa's storytellers, not just for Africa actually, but for the world. Why is this so important? It's because I think the importance of Africa in terms of its global, in terms of the world, global biodiversity, in terms of the world's opportunity to combat climate change, it's been really underestimated. Africa has the second largest green lung, the Congo Basin. It is it's a phenomenal asset that is hardly spoken about. Africa has 8 of the world's 34 biodiversity hotspots, and many of our species are renowned around the world and beloved by millions of people, maybe billions of people around the world. But I'm going to take you on a little backstory. So I didn't go into wildlife film as the first thing I started with. I started off living in Nairobi. I grew up just on the outskirts of the city. I'm one of 9 children. And as a child, my parents, I think they struggled with us. I was the 6th daughter, the 5th daughter, the 6th born. And we lived in an area that had forests and swamps and trees around us. And my parents dealt with us by pushing us out the door and telling us to go and explore and don't come back until lunchtime. And that was how they avoided the mess that we were making in the house. That experience, that exposure was very unique. We used to go down to the river, we would swim in the rivers, we would catch fish and cook them on the riverbanks, we'd climb trees, we'd wade through swamps, we would go from village to village. It was really quite an incredible way to grow up, a way of being, a secure life that doesn't exist anymore. You would never let your child, age 5 or 6, go wandering about in the wilds like that anymore. So we were very lucky as kids. But going out and spending time in nature and climbing trees and seeing things was also an amazing opportunity to fall in love with nature, an opportunity that most kids around the world don't have anymore. I went on to finish high school. I went to university. I studied ecology. After falling in love, of course, it was like the most natural thing for me. I didn't realize that I could have a career in this until we saw elephants being killed for their ivory to serve markets half a world away in China. And experiencing this and witnessing it for myself was so shocking. You can't be a scientist and study elephants when they're being slaughtered all around you and not feel that you have to do something about it. In fact, as a scientist studying elephants, I think I was just lucky to be able to entertain my curiosity and look at their behavior and watch them in the wild behaving naturally, when in fact, these animals were sliding towards extinction. And that was in part due to the earlier hunting of elephants for their tusks during the 1980s, again in 2002, and then again in 2008, when there was a one-off sale of ivory from 4 Southern African countries to China and Japan. At that time, I was in the middle of my PhD. I was studying elephants on the top of a mountain in this incredible rainforest area. And I couldn't continue with my research while these animals were being slaughtered. And so I gave up my PhD for 2 years to help the government to fight against the reopening of the ivory trade. The story about elephants is really poignant because elephants are like human beings. They live in families. They're very emotional. They care for each other. They grieve when one of them dies. They try to help each other when they're sick or injured. And so in a way, they've become this incredible tool for telling stories about wildlife because we can relate to them almost like human beings. And I learned this when I was doing this work on elephants. At the time, China, Japan, and the 4 Southern African countries had a very powerful argument, which was that elephants are worth so much more if you just kill them and sell their tusks. Those tusks were worth at one time $3,000 per kilogram. You can imagine each elephant is carrying around 30 to 50 kilograms of ivory. And we were seeing these animals that we'd become to know as individuals, almost like friends. These elephants were named as individuals. We knew their mothers, their fathers, their children, their cousins, their relatives. And these elephants also knew us. They would even respond to their names. And these are wild, gigantic animals. So we really worked hard to fight it as a government. And then I gave up on governments and I went to the public. And I launched a campaign called Hands Off Our Elephants. This campaign was enormously successful because we were able to win the hearts and minds of Kenyans by saying, they are our elephants. It's not just that they're beloved around the world, they are our elephants and we are going to fight to save them. We went to the courtrooms, we fought against ivory traffickers. We went to the newspapers, we went to the media. And it was during this campaign, which was 2013 to 2018, is when I really discovered the power of the media and the power of stories. This particular elephant campaign was based on the story of this one elephant. Her name was Kumquat. Kumquat was the matriarch. She had this phenomenal family. They were one of the most famous elephant families in the world. We knew their sisters, their children, her grandchildren. And these were so calm. These elephants had been photographed by Nick Brandt, a famous British photographer. And the day after, some of the most extraordinary photographs were taken of this family. They were all gunned down. They were just left in a heap of flesh with their faces hacked open, their tusks removed. And it just seemed like such an injustice that somebody would do this to these animals in order for people to have trinkets, necklaces, and earrings, and chopsticks in China and Japan. And so the power of the story of Kumquat and her family moved Kenyans. We ended up changing the laws. We created new courtrooms specifically to deal with cases of ivory at the port of Mombasa, at the airport in Nairobi. We were able to get the president and his wife involved in the campaign. And as a result, the poaching in Kenya plummeted. And today, elephants in Kenya are increasing in number. Meanwhile, in our neighboring country, Tanzania, their elephants' populations declined by more than 85%. We were able to create so much interest in elephants that we would mobilize these mass demonstrations on the streets of Nairobi, sometimes up to 4,000 people marching to demand the justice for elephants, lions, rhinos, and any other endangered species. And while it was such a huge success because elephant numbers began to increase, poachers were being put behind bars, what we found is that the media, the traditional media in Kenya, was not really following the same script. In fact, elephants, lions, and many other species are reported mostly for the negative reasons. And for most Kenyans, elephants, lions, giraffes, and many other species are well known only as a tourism attraction. And headlines like this, depicting our wildlife as a menace, as a problem, as a threat, as killers, as destroyers of livelihoods, were very, very common. And so while we succeeded in stopping the poachers, we didn't succeed in addressing an underlying problem, which is the overall perception of these iconic animals and the landscapes in which they live. And so I began to think about, so what could we do to change this idea, this perception that we have of our amazing wildlife? The situation was very serious because these animals live in very close proximity to people. Nairobi National Park is right in the city of Nairobi. And just adjacent to the park are communities. And the lions from the park, and there are about 40 lions, sometimes leave the park and they hunt on livestock that belong to the local people. On this particular day, 7 lions were killed by the community. They were 2 females, they were sisters, and all their cubs. And they were killed because they were training their cubs how to kill goats inside a homestead. After they'd been killed, all of the schools in the local area were shut down and the children were brought to come and see their first lion. So this is how children were learning about this incredible animal that to the rest of the world is seen as this courageous demonstration of strength. You know, lions are the king of the jungle, but to these children, a good lion is a dead lion. And so this is the narrative that we had to counter. And where better to look than among our own people? In the same community was a young boy called Richard Torreira. And we found Richard by a surprising method. We were looking at how serious this human-wildlife conflict problem was and how should we deal with it. We were imagining all kinds of high-tech ways of protecting people from animals like lions. And out of the blue emerges this little boy, 13 years old. He's looking after his father's livestock. He goes to a local school, but he's devised an amazing device to keep lions out of his father's homestead. And this is what it looked like. Lights driven by a battery and flickering because he took a part of a motorbike, the indicator switch box, and he linked it all together. How he knew about electronics, nobody knows. But he figured out how to keep lions away from his father by observing lions and observing that lions don't come to the homestead when there is a constant light or when there are no lights. And he realized that lions are very aware of flashing lights, which they think are people walking around. So his flashing light system got him huge international attention. He was actually celebrated on the TED stage in Los Angeles when he was only 13 years old. It won him a standing ovation. And today, Richard's device is being used by communities all across Africa, as well as Asia, and even in some parts of South America. But to many of the communities who live with wildlife, there are so many other problems. It's not just lions. The zebras are eating their crops. The elephants are raiding their farms and preventing people from sometimes even walking to school. And these communities are not wealthy. So the challenge of keeping wildlife safe in a country where human population is growing and where poverty is quite severe is a very serious challenge. We really need to find new solutions. Some of the problems are not just about poverty, they are actually about development. Kenya is one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. And much of our land is being converted to agriculture. That means we're losing land for wildlife, but we're also putting barriers in the way of the movement of animals. And since most of our wildlife is migratory, this is creating a very serious crisis. This is what some of the farms actually look like. In addition, we have a situation of increased mining. We have people mining for minerals or building materials across the country, not just in Kenya, but actually all across the African continent. So it's not just Kenyan wildlife that is affected. And a part of the problem is that our people don't understand the importance of wildlife beyond tourism. Take, for example, the Chulu Hills. This is a mountain range in the southern part of Kenya that is actually the only source of water for the entire city of Mombasa. Mombasa is one of the largest cities in Africa. It's the second largest city in Kenya. And this forest is so incredibly important for providing the service of water for this major city, which is hundreds of kilometers away. But people in the area don't understand this. And this forest is under increasing pressure to be converted into agriculture, which would have a huge impact, economic impact on the city of Mombasa. But so much of this science is way beyond the understanding of the local people on the ground, the people in Mombasa, and the people in government as well. And one of the things that I feel we really must do is use our storytelling knowledge, use our tools, the cameras, to tell these stories, to educate and win the support and interest of government people, to change our policies and our regulations so that we can secure wilderness areas, not just for iconic animals, not just for tourists, but for ourselves, and to secure the services that these natural ecosystems provide. In recent years, we've done several things to inform our approach. We've spent a lot of time talking to people in different kinds of forums, in schools, in communities, in rural areas, in urban areas, with children, with grown-ups. We've listened to them, we've let them draw to show us what they care about. In the case of children, it's amazing. They don't just care about wildlife because of the revenue it brings. They want to go out and spend time in the wild with wildlife. And that caused us to create a program called Wildlife Warriors Kids. We felt we have to deal with children as an important way of creating a new culture, a new generation of courageous young people who care about wildlife and will defend it. So Wildlife Warriors Kids is a program with children. It includes producing newsletters and magazines, taking children into the wild, having scientific expeditions with them, where they learn how to live in nature. They can pitch their own tents, they learn about bushcraft, but they also learn about science. They get to meet top scientists from Kenya and international scientists, especially in central Kenya. We have a great relationship with Princeton University. And so children get to participate in citizen science events alongside grown-ups and scientists as well. They learn about technology, DNA, analyzing data. They learn about storytelling. When I was at university, storytelling wasn't anything that we were taught. It was not actually seen as in any way relevant. The only time you actually had to learn how to speak was to do your viva, to do your final presentation. So we weren't ever really prepared for the role that we would play once we completed our degrees. Sometimes we're taught a little bit of how to do teaching, but not really about speaking to the public. And so this is something we're bringing to children, to teachers, to anybody that we engage with. How should we be telling these conservation stories to win hearts and minds? And in this case, what we do is we bring incredible award-winning photographers, and we set them up with children, with cameras, to teach them the basics of photography. And soon we'll be doing film as well. But it's not just children, we also take their teachers, because they are the most important link between us and children. For the teachers, these expeditions, which are up to 5 days in the wild, it's an incredible experience because government schools in Kenya don't pay for these schools or for the teachers to go into the wild to learn about nature themselves. So that makes it really difficult for them to teach this content in the classroom. It's actually a part of the curriculum nowadays. They need to teach children about nature and the environment. But if they don't have any practical experience, it's very hard for them to share in a meaningful way with children. So we take teachers, we teach them entomology, botany, mammalogy, ornithology, we teach them storytelling, we teach them to simply connect to nature by hugging trees, by walking barefoot, by listening to the birds and the insects, by taking photographs, and by nature journaling. And in fact, one of the teachers who's participated in these events with us is an Indian lady called Pooja, who is based in Delhi, and she joins us via Zoom to teach our teachers nature journaling, and the teachers have now transferred that to their children. A lot of this work is funded by National Geographic, so I just wanted to do a shout out to all of you who are from National Geographic. They've been extraordinary in terms of developing our educational program. And I want to tell you now about beyond children, one of the most important programs that we run is called Wildlife Warriors itself. This is the TV series that was mentioned in the very beginning. A few years ago, as we were trying to educate our public, we went out to look for the documentaries that had been made in Kenya so that we could show them in Kenya. And we had so many challenges. Most of the big international companies that produce wildlife documentaries don't make them available in Africa. It's very, very difficult to bring those films back home. It was very shocking to us that some of the major blue chip companies, BBC, Nat Geo, Disney, Animal Planet, they had locked up all of these films in contracts that made it very difficult for anyone else to have access to them. And that meant we didn't have material for teaching purposes and to inspire our own audiences. But even when we did get those films, we were able to show them in Kenya. So it took quite a while, but we did get some films. We found that most of the time, these films don't really portray Africans and Africa in the way that we would probably communicate things. In fact, if you think about it, most of the films about wildlife and nature in Africa don't have Africans in them at all. And historical films have often misrepresented Africans or underrepresented Africans, which is still the case. So we decided we'd make our own films. Now, I'm an ecologist. I did my PhD on elephants. Ask me anything about elephants, I can answer you. But I didn't really know anything about filmmaking, but that didn't stop me. And I hope that it doesn't stop any of you students who are watching this. I raised some money from National Geographic, USAID, and the Department of the Interior. And we started making our own wildlife television series called Wildlife Warriors. It is a documentary series, and it focuses on shining a light on conservation heroes and heroines at the front line of conservation. My crew and I, we're all Kenyans. They start with, from the left, Laban Loita, who's our sound man, Evod Muhire, who is from Rwanda. That's myself in the red. The next is Steve Wagwa, who is a Kenyan cameraman. He's our director of photography. And that's my crew. In season 1, we showed 13 episodes and 14 different heroes throughout that season. These were people from all walks of life. Some of them were scientists, some were in conservation, some of them were wildlife heroes, veterinarians, rescuers of wildlife, different kinds of people, women and men, doing amazing work at the front line of conservation. Our crew had never filmed wildlife before when we started. For them, it was quite a new experience. And I remember our first shoot. We were filming wild dogs. They're slightly smaller than domestic dogs. They live in huge packs. They're incredibly jumpy, nervous animals, and they run like the wind. To find them is very difficult. So once you found them, you have to sit very still, very quiet, and film them. And they are incredibly active animals. They are constantly making little sounds. They sound like birds. They don't bark like dogs. They sound like birds. They chirp to each other. They interact with each other. And if you disturb them, they will just run. And on the very first day when we found them, we had this pack of 14, which was incredibly rare. The first thing my cameraman did was open the door, and the dogs just took off running, and we didn't see them again for the rest of the day. And so filming with a crew in Africa has been very interesting. Because there are no Africans in the wildlife film industry until we started doing this work, we had to literally teach our crew from scratch how to behave around wildlife. And today we are very lucky. We have access to the right kind of equipment. We have a lot of experience having filmed season 1 and season 2 now. That's 26 different episodes of wildlife. My crew is actually very experienced, one of the most experienced in the continent. COVID created a lot of challenges for us, but we continued to work throughout COVID. We went and visited all of these amazing field sites in the wild, because although tourists weren't coming to Kenya, the work was still going on. And so it was a very fascinating time to document what was happening on the ground. When we film, I'm the ecologist, I'm also the host of the show, I'm also the creator, and my crew are an amazing team of people who learn about the different issues, and they've become some of the most fantastic champions for conservation. In this case, we were talking about wire snares that are being used around the Masai Mara against animals like buffaloes and hippos. And I need every episode, I have actually spent time talking to my crew about what the situation is with these particular animals that we're working on, and how it is that we can tell these stories sensitively, not just about the animals, but also about the people. Take, for example, our bat hero, his name is Paul Babala. Paul is an amazing scientist. He's one of the top bat experts in the world. And he took us to see some incredible sights in caves in Kenya. And in these stories, we don't just want to focus on these amazing animals called bats. We want to focus on the story of our hero. Where did they come from? He came from a village where they didn't have any animals. Their communities already killed everything and converted the whole landscape into agriculture. And so Paul fell in love with animals because there were none where he came from. And his family thought he was crazy going into becoming a scientist. He works for the National Museums of Kenya. And so his story is very inspiring for all those Kenyans who come from a similar background. And that episode, which will be among the first in season 2, I think will surprise a lot of people. It was the first episode we shot. And because it was coming at the beginning of COVID, the story became 10 times more important to be told than before. I'm not sure if any of you guys noticed, in the beginning of COVID, when everybody thought it was bats that brought COVID to us, in some countries, people started trying to eliminate bats. In Rwanda, they started shooting chemicals into trees to basically kill off the bats, which are migratory, and sometimes they literally will fill trees in the city of Kigali. And so that kind of ignorance is such a huge threat to many of our bat species, or many of which are endangered. Our filming has taken us to incredible places. Of course, places you know about, the Masai Mara, where we filmed not just the wildebeest, but a real crisis facing the community there, who are experiencing a lot of human-elephant conflict. And it's taken us to places where cameras have never been before. This particular shoot was on the top of a mountain, a very sacred mountain called the Loita Hills, where there is a forest called the Forest of the Lost Child. And we worked with the elders there who have been preserving this forest for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. And we spent a week in the forest with the elders learning about their traditional knowledge. This episode has almost no animals. It's only about people and their relationships to trees. So we get to do some very surprising things in this season. And I know that our audiences in Kenya are really looking forward to seeing this, because it's never been seen on TV before, and definitely Kenyans have never heard about the Forest of the Lost Child. I got to sit and spend time with these elders who believe they can predict the future. And there is something that they do called the throwing of the stones. They have these little pebbles, 400 or so, in a gourd, and they shake the gourd and pour the stones out. And then they read the stones. They actually count them. The Maasai people are very, very good in mathematics. They count these stones, and it reveals to them all kinds of interesting things. So they asked me to ask them a question. I said, okay, how's my son? He lives in America. And this particular elder, his name is Pamwat. He read the stones, and after a while he said, well, your son is okay, but he has a problem with his left foot. And so I was like, well, it's just ridiculous. I don't believe in such stuff. And I called him in the evening and I said, you won't believe it, but this is what the elder told me. And he said, yeah, Mom, I broke my left foot a few years ago, and it still gives me a lot of pain. So I don't know how they do it, how they get to know these things, but I do believe that their spiritual relationship to trees, to plants, to medicines, to the caves, they have these special waterfalls that they are very sacred to them. Because of those beliefs, they've done a far better job at protecting nature than us with all our science and our guns and our bullets. So I think that as much as some people, when I tell them of this story about Pamwat and his reading the stones and reading the future and reading the past, people tell me, but that's just garbage. Well, the truth is, even if it is garbage, these people have used it to protect this incredible, incredible forest. Every episode of Wildlife Warriors also includes children. And in this case, we were interviewing children about their understanding of elephants and human-elephant conflict. And our hero, who's sitting on the left here, was talking to the kids. And we do this intentionally. We want children across the continent to engage in this show because they see themselves in the children that we film with. We also film in vernacular languages. So although the main language spoken in the show is English, we do record people speaking their own local languages, and then we provide subtitles so that everybody can hear their own language. I'm going to quickly show you the Sizzle of season 2, which we're so proud of. Let me just see if I can get this thing to run. Hold on. I think I have to stop this share and go to the. One second. So I'm going to show you season 2 Sizzle. This is the season which has not yet come out, but just so that you can get a sense of what this show is like. This is just a 2-minute sizzle.
On our way to Kanika Island. This time we're looking for Pombo dolphins. The northern reaches of the Kenyan coast are over 60 islands. This is the Lamu archipelago.
Paula, can you just restart it? For me, the video isn't moving right now. There seems to be a lag.
If you closely look at them, you can see those prehistoric attributes.
She's so big. Oh, she's beautiful. Warrior's favorite scratch is behind her ears.
Bro, come here. Boy, good boy, come on, boy.
Even in the safest of sanctuaries, life as a lion is still tough.
So we've been tracking lions this morning, and these footprints are going to lead us to exactly where this lion made this kill.
Wow, there are so many. Well, it's quite sad.
Not moving.
Today, its death has led to the renewal of more life. Less than a kilometer away is one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth, the coral reef.
There's such magical places to find, and that's why it's so important that I want to preserve this area.
If we're going to save Africa's wildlife, we need many more warriors.
Was that visible?
So Paula, the video didn't actually move for us. So maybe you just need to share your screen again. The audio was perfectly fine, but unfortunately the video wasn't playing. Some internet lag, I think. This is unfortunately the reality of online. So if you don't mind, could you try again? But the sound was great.
I think let me try one more time. And
do you want one of us to try it?
Maybe you can try it on your end. You've got the link actually.
Okay, 1 second. Can you all see this?
I can see it.
Okay.
And we're on our way to Kanika Island. This time, we're looking for Pombo dolphins. In the northern reaches of the Kenyan coast are over 60 islands. This is the Lamu archipelago. I've just arrived in Olpejeda Conservancy.
If you closely look at them, you can see those prehistoric attributes.
She's so big. Oh, she's beautiful.
Warrior's favorite scratch is behind her ears.
Bram, come here. Boy, good boy. Come on, boy.
Even in the safest of sanctuaries, life as a lion is still tough.
So we've been tracking lions this morning, and these footprints are going to lead us to exactly where this lion made this kill.
Wow, there are so many. While it's quite sad that a giraffe has died today, its death has led to the renewal of more life. Less than a kilometre away is one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth, the coral reef.
They're such magical places to find, and that's why it's so important that I want to conserve this area.
If we're going to save Africa's wildlife, we need many more warriors.
Well, I hope it ran well that time.
I hope so.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to go back to my slides if that's okay. You can see from the film that it's a ton of fun to make wildlife documentaries, and I really hope that all the scientists in this meeting consider storytelling as a major part of your craft. Doing science is fantastic. And in fact, when I started doing conservation, I remember talking about education, and I was told that's not conservation. Because in those days, in the early days of conservation, we talked primarily about doing the science of conservation, learning about species extinction, minimum viable populations, and things like education and communication were seen as kind of peripheral and not really scientific enough or not important enough. Well, because of the state of the world today, the species extinction crisis, the climate crisis, there's no question in my mind, the science alone is not going to save us. The science needs to be communicated in a way that our audiences can understand it. And our audiences have to be everyone from children all the way up to these leading government decision makers. So Wildlife Warriors is shown to children across Kenya. We are in over 100 schools in the country. It's also shown on national television on free-to-air channels. We're just about to start streaming into South Africa on a South African channel. And, you know, when we started, people told me I was crazy, this is going to be expensive, and it's really not worth it. Well, for the behavior change alone, it's worth it. It is expensive, no question. But for the behavior change, for the level of comprehension and understanding about nature, no question, it's absolutely worth it. But television channels in Africa are beginning to pay for this content. Something very, very new, something I'm super excited about. But it means that there is actually a financial ecosystem available for us to play into. And of course, the National Geographics of the world have always been doing it. On the behavior change, what we're seeing is children across Kenya becoming associated with being wildlife warriors. To them, that means going out into the field, planting trees, aligning themselves with potential careers like being rangers or wardens, conservationists, field managers, and now increasingly aligning themselves with the idea of becoming storytellers. And this is one of the most exciting slides I want to show you. I've just come back from the Masai Mara. I came back yesterday. After spending a couple of days with my apprentice, that's him there, Clement Kiragu, the guy on to the right of me in the picture. Clement is an international award-winning photographer, Kenyan. He's a wildlife photographer, but he's become so excited about the idea of conservation storytelling through film that he's now doing an apprenticeship with world-class filmmakers in Kenya. That is Bob Poole and his wife, Gina, and Joe Schofield, who is on Clement's right. These are international filmmakers who have agreed to help us to develop local talent and capacity in filmmaking. This is one of the most important things. So this is my final slide. I just wanted to let you know that part of our challenge is getting content onto television. We're very lucky that now African channels are taking our content and broadcasting it at prime time, whether it's in Kenya or Tanzania, South Africa. This is something that's very new and really exciting, because that means families will be sitting down and watching it. But having this content on TV isn't going to solve everything. We need to think about our work as almost like a three-pronged stool. We are explorers. We go out there and we discover things. That is super exciting. We are scientists. We're out there doing research and uncovering secrets of all these amazing animals in the world and making that information available through our storytelling. Those are the three legs of a stool, I believe, which are the most powerful way to win hearts and minds. But in order to create the kind of storytelling that is going to make the difference, the kind of storytelling that is going to move the needle, stop the species extinction, or drive people to action to stop the climate change crisis, this has to happen the right way. We in Africa are looking at changing the narrative, putting Africans at the heart of African filmmaking. It still surprises me and many people that Africans are not at the heart of African wildlife filmmaking, that most of the films in Africa have been made by other people for other audiences through their lens, not through our lens about our stories. So I think this is one of the most powerful and important moments in our time to take advantage of this opportunity. We are not just talking about developing storytellers, training people how to tell stories. We need to equip people so that they can tell those stories effectively. But we also need the funds to commission those stories so that we can get them on air, whether on local television, on all the new streaming services, and that kind of thing. We need to saturate all of our media with stories about wildlife, whether it's documentaries, soap operas, music, you name it. There are so many opportunities. And I know that India has really played a major role in telling stories, and your wildlife is seen in Africa. I mean, there's no African who doesn't know about tigers, for example. But how do we, as people from the global south, collaborate to actually maybe turn the world upside down? The world's biodiversity is in the global south. We should be at the top of the storytelling. We need to be at the top of driving the global change that is needed to save our species and to stem the climate change crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. We'll open up for questions now. Those who have questions, please post them on Slack on the questions thread. There are already some questions that have come in. So the first question is, what have you found to be the biggest challenge in propagating conservation in Kenya? And how do you combat it?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. The biggest challenge we find is that it is viewed by many people, conservation is viewed by many people as the opposite of development, that conservation can only exist after development has succeeded, like what you see maybe in Europe and in the Americas. And so as Africa is rapidly developing, especially in Kenya, we're seeing enormous moves towards industrial development. And much of this development is taking up space or is interfering with the movements of animals. And we have so much about migratory species, so many migratory species that this is threatening wildlife. And of late, very sadly, we have had several people killed for defending nature. So now fear and intimidation has become a major threat to conservation. The brutal daytime, blood-curdling murders are causing people to withdraw from conservation out of fear. So I would say those are the major threats.
Thanks, Paula. I think there's a lot of similarities actually across your talk and even your answer to this first question that I'm sure students across India, but also Asia who are joining us today will really be able to relate to many of the things that you have said. So our next question is, your work in convincing the people about the importance of wildlife and its conservation is very often a disheartening and overwhelming task. And I think you alluded a little bit to that in your answer. And so they've said, I see a lot of people from my own country seeing animals as a menace. So I wonder how you deal with that on a professional and personal level, and how do you scale your progress?
Right. Again, really amazing question. There's no question that humans and animals are clashing increasingly, especially as humans move more into wildlife areas and as human populations grow. We need to find solutions, and we need to also be very compassionate. One of the challenges in Africa, for example, is that if you killed an elephant, the state would come down on you like a ton of bricks. They would fly in a helicopter and catch you and probably shoot you dead. But if your livestock is killed by a lion, generally you're required to go to a police station, fill in God knows how many forms and make a complaint, and before you'll ever get any compensation. Chances are you won't see any compensation for the loss of that animal or even the loss of your child, sometimes for years. So this has to change. This really has to change. We have to show equal compassion for people, or maybe even more compassion for people than for the animals. And that, I think, requires us to have a new relationship. I meet communities all the time who tell me, why can't we just be allowed to do this for ourselves? Why do we have to depend on the government all the time? We want to save this wildlife. It's part of our culture. It's part of our tradition. We've always lived with these animals, but we're treated like we are the bad guys. So there needs to be a new conversation, I would say, in Africa in particular. I think we need a totally new transformative approach to conservation for us to save these iconic species.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Please continue.
Yeah, how do we scale our progress? Well, going to the airwaves on cinema, television is so important. I mean, how do you think the environmental movement started overseas? It started with all these films about our animals. If these films can inspire people as far away as Iceland, then of course the same approach can work here in Africa. We are countries that have they have leapfrogged so much technology. The same for Asia, right? The opportunity for us is even greater. The amount of creativity in Africa and Asia and even South America, I think, far exceeds what has ever happened in the West. The speed at which things change is so much greater. So there's a great opportunity for us to actually move into new spaces, create new spaces for communicating, for winning hearts and minds, and for connecting people to nature. That is what I find most exciting. We, for example, have our TV show on telephone-based streaming services. So it's actually very exciting that people are watching wildlife warriors on their telephone, and people stop us in the streets. There's so much recognition. More than 51% of Kenyans are seeing my show. So we're going to scale by just moving across Africa, taking our content into other countries, taking it to different age groups, and also telling the stories in different parts of the continent as well. So that's really exciting. But on the 13th and 14th of October, we're holding an event, and I hope everyone here got to see my last slide. I should have pointed out at the time. We're holding an online event. It's called an Open Space Technology event to bring together storytellers, scientists, film producers, distributors, anybody involved in the storytelling space to come together to actually define the priorities for wildlife conservation in Africa for the storytelling and filmmaking. And I think that learning from other places, but also embracing ideas that come from other places could be a great way of accelerating the creation of a critical mass of African filmmakers, because to me, that is what's going to make the biggest difference, is when the stories engage us, involve us, they are about us, they are for us. I think we'll see much more engagement by Africans who at the moment will be looking at David Attenborough or many of these people, and they just don't relate to them because they don't look like us, they don't have our shared stories or our shared history. We have other stories about what white people did to us in Africa. But when it's our stories, I think it's much easier to win hearts and minds.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paula. Actually, and speaking of having more filmmakers, the next question is a fairly practical one. They'd like to know more about how you raised funds for your equipment and collecting your crew together for a cause. So some practical advice to aspiring filmmakers listening in.
Yeah, thank you for that. I actually have some of my staff are also listening in, and I think we went about it in a different way from most people. So a lot of companies would start by going and buying equipment and all that, hiring staff, hiring filmmakers. I didn't do that. I started with the idea of a TV series, and then I went to donors and I said, sorry, my dog is barking. And then I said, I want to make a TV series, but I'm going to hire a production company. So I hired a company, we sat down together, we went to the television station that we want to broadcast on, and we said, we have this idea, will you take it? And they said, well, maybe, but this is, so we asked them, tell us about your audience. What kind of people are they? What do they like? What do they not like? And we created the whole series around what we believed the audience would go for. So for some people, they probably look at it and they're like, this is really strange because you're mixing up languages. You've got a bit of English, a bit of Swahili, a bit of Ma in there. But that's because that's what that audience wanted to hear. And we wanted to have children in there as well. So we didn't invest in anything except paying for the time of a small crew to go with us into the field to do this work. And we also took advantage of this vast network of scientists and experts around the continent. We invited people to tell us exciting ideas of what's happening, what are they working on. A lot of people don't realize they're working on the most fascinating things. So I did one episode about small mammals, and my crew was like, nobody cares about mice and rats, it's like, because that's all we know is that they're mice and rats and they carry diseases. Well, actually, there are over 100 different small mammals in Kenya, and they are fascinating. And we had to go out at night to catch them. So the whole episode is full of drama of going out and catching. They are small, but they are very beautiful, very colorful, and very different. And the ecology of these small mammals tells us so much about elephants and forests and different kinds of habitats. So we were able to tap into this network because suddenly what some people think of as boring, pedantic research comes alive as this exciting unfolding drama. And that's what I think every scientist probably here probably doesn't realize, that there is a story in everything that we're doing.
Definitely. I'm going to combine actually two questions to ask you because they're a little bit related, but essentially it's about the content of your show. And so the first question is partly a comment. So they've said, Nishant has said, great way to share the traditional knowledge to a generation who are unaware about it. And so he wants to know how you manage to convince people to share their stories. And related to that, Abhishek would like to know the ways you approached the study of communities in the African context. So do you take inputs from linguists and anthropologists and sociologists, or how else do you look at that, and how important is intersectionality when engaging with communities and issues such as community rights, perhaps, in Kenya? So essentially on the content of your show and how you go about thinking through that.
Very, very interesting. I mean, first on how do we convince people to share their stories? It's interesting because I've been engaged in doing media stuff for a very long time. Not in a big way, there would be crews coming, and because I'm working on elephants, there's always somebody looking for a story about elephants. But they often would not include me in the story, and they would rather have a British person narrating that story. And I used to find it a bit irritating, but I just thought, well, it just affects me. But actually, it turns out it's been happening to African experts for decades. They have been asked to give their information, and then the story is told by somebody else who actually doesn't know anything about the subject, but has taken it and just repeated it because they are the right skin color, the right gender, right age, or whatever. So when I go out there and talk to scientists and tell them I want to tell their stories, I usually do it in 2 or 3 rounds. I don't just show up and start filming, which is maybe what a lot of companies do, because it's expensive to come all the way from England and come to Africa and start trying to make a film every single day. It's worth thousands of dollars. But since we're local, we can interact with people. go out to their locations, sit with them, talk to them, help them see what the exciting stuff is, do some little short clips and show them what they look like. I mean, you'd be amazed when people see themselves on camera, even if it's just on your phone. You talk, ask somebody some questions, let them see how they look, and suddenly they see the possibility of what it could be like. So that's one way of getting people interested. I've only ever had one guy say to me, I don't think I can do it. I just don't think I can do it. And I know that he would be amazing. He's doing a phenomenal study comparing giraffes and camels. And I really want to tell that story. But so long as he's not ready, I'm not going to tell that story. And so I give a lot of respect to these scientists, and I train them whenever necessary. We train them, we give them a lot of time. Even when we come in as a crew, we're a small crew. We don't interfere too much with their work as much as possible. But then when we work with communities, sometimes we're talking to people who don't even speak. I can't speak their language because we have 47 languages in Kenya. But what I found, and it's such a pleasure to go out to these places, what I found is that communities have never been filmed by local crews. They've always had international crews who, amazingly, I think, have this idea of what the picture should look like. And so they start moving things around and telling people to be in a certain way and then a certain light or whatever. And what we do is we do it as naturally as possible. We tell them, we just want to film what you normally do. And with the community, for example, those elders on the top of the mountain, they were just so proud to be able to tell their own story in their own words. I did have a translator, so we did ask them to choose their own translator. There were 2 young men, and we ended up choosing one of them, so that we could get the story exactly the right way. And then we do bring in other translators to help us. For many of our tribes, there is virtually no written historical knowledge about them. So there's no books to go to. And sometimes there aren't even experts to go and talk to. But in the case of the Maasai, they are one of the best studied of all the tribes. And so I do talk to anthropologists and try to understand, certain things. And at one point, I actually had an argument with I had a director. I brought in an international director who had an approach to the film which didn't match the ceremony, which was a very sacred ceremony that we were filming. And I had to stop him and just say, everything has to stop. We're not going to do it that way. We have to film it the way it's done traditionally. Otherwise, we're just not telling a true story. So it can be very challenging, but it's also incredibly eye-opening when you do get access and you can go in and see things. And sometimes you don't have much time. A ceremony is happening, and once it's done, it's done. They're not going to repeat anything. You have one take, that's it. So you have to be very flexible, very relaxed. So you just can't get too upset about things you miss. But we do spend a lot of time sitting with people in the community and talking to them. We film for days and days. Like I can film for 10 days, and in the end, we might only have a 5-minute film. And so I'm pretty sure for some people, it's a shock that you did all that and you only came up with this 5 minutes, but that 5 minutes tells the story very beautifully. So it means that I have to be very careful about what we film, but also how we edit. That is probably the most important thing, is the editing. And I think people take it for granted that the editor will know what to do. Having a good editor is just as important, if not more important, than the camera crew.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paula. I'm afraid, unfortunately, our time is up for today. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us. I think there's a lot of similarities between the value and the role that conservation storytelling is playing in Kenya and the way it would play out in the countries, both in India, in other countries in Asia, and of course, I'm sure other countries in Africa, from the challenges that conservation is facing to even the challenges of funding. There's definitely a lot of similarity. And one of the things that we are hoping to do in this edition of SCCS is actually talk about decolonizing conservation. And it's a theme that you alluded to in your talk. And it's something that is globally becoming more of a conversation currently. And so, we do hope to delve into that aspect a little bit more in a panel that we're going to have tomorrow or day after, I forget. But thank you so much. And I'm sure if people have any questions, they might reach out to you. I'm sure people have this in mind, and I have this question. When do we get to watch Wildlife Warriors outside Kenya if we're not Kenyan?
Well, thank you for that. And I really appreciate everything. Wildlife Warriors is available on YouTube. So you can actually just look up Wildlife Warriors on YouTube. We've got a whole channel. It's got a huge W as our icon. You can't miss it. You can also watch it on the Water Bear Network. And if you're interested in this issue and want to participate in our event on 13th and 14th, just check out our handle on Instagram or Facebook on Wildlife Direct. And you can sign in. It's going to be a Zoom meeting. So we'd really love to have anybody who's interested in joining us for that. But thank you all so much for your incredible comments and questions. They really do cause me to stop and think and really consider some of the issues that have been raised. And I do hope that we can start doing collaborative projects because, yes, I want to tell stories about Africa, but I think Africans should be in India talking about some of your issues. And likewise, or not just Indians, Asians, Chinese, South Americans, we are global citizens and we need to have the confidence to speak about each other's issues to our own audiences and as experts to speak as global experts on these issues. Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Paula. We loved having you.
Thanks.